Today, we are diving into the high energy world of corporate event production. Aren't you excited about that? From maximizing partner relationships to mastering sponsorship management, our guest has seen it all and is here to share valuable strategies that can make your next event unforgettable.
Welcome to the Events Demystified podcast, where we demystify the world of in-person, virtual, and hybrid events, AV production, and AI technology by sharing practical tips, tricks, and strategies to help your event succeed. This podcast is brought to you by Treefan Events, a woman-owned boutique event production agency that caters to event professionals, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. We specialize in AV and AI education, integration, automation, and implementation, all based on our Fit for Events framework, which focuses on futuristic AV production, innovative AI technology, thriving audiences, and empowering behind-the-scenes teams. And I'm your host, Anka Platon Treefan, with over 2 decades of hands-on experience in event production, event management, and now AI technologies and cybersecurity.
Well, friends, welcome to another episode of the EventsDemystified podcast. I'm your host, Anka Platon Trifan. And today I have lined up a fantastic guest who is well versed in everything from event logistics to creating engaging trade show experiences. And we're going to talk all about the in and outs of event production. Our guest today is Evan Babins, an event production manager at Scotiabank. Evan has spent over a decade in corporate event production, working with major clients such as Intuit, Nissan, Equitable Bank, TD Bank. He's been recognized as one of BizBash's top 250 event professionals and one of EventTech's top 50 most influential event technology professionals. Today, Evan will share insights on how to leverage vendor networks, enhance sponsorship ROI, and bring innovative strategies to trade shows and conferences. If you're in event production or if you're planning an event and you're planning trade shows and you're curious about sponsorship management or simply want to elevate your events, stay tuned. And with that, let's bring our guest in. Welcome to the show, Evan. How are you today?
I'm so good. Thanks so much for having me. It's feel like this is months and months in the making, and I'm really happy to be here with you.
I do not disagree. It's definitely taken some time for two busy professionals like ourselves to find some time on the calendar. But before we actually jump into the world of event production, I would love to hear about one of your maybe most memorable experiences that you've had on the job. What's the most maybe unexpected challenge that you had to face and how did you overcome it? We like a good story here.
Yeah, I love telling this story. So a couple of years ago, I would say 5 years ago now or so, I was working on a massive event in Germany. Actually, I was working for a Canadian-based event production agency. We had one of our pharmaceutical clients was in Germany for a massive launch of a product for their new drug. It was a huge production. It was like a $500,000 AV build. It was really massive, live streaming to 30,000 people around the world with 1,500 people in the room in Germany in the convention center, and everything was lined up. It was all good to go. We were working for like 8 months on this program, and I'm flying from Toronto to Munich where the event was happening. Thankfully, I had Wi-Fi on the plane. I was doing some last minute updates to my run of show and a couple other things I was working on the plane. And I get an email from this AV company that we were working with that basically said, sorry to do this. We double booked ourselves the day of your show. This is like 72 hours in advance right now. The other client gave us 10% more revenue. So good luck and see you later, basically. Like it was
No.
like it was like crazy. It was like
No.
one of
It's
those,
like,
it was like
can this airplane crash right now so
literally
I
it was
don't have
like
to deal with this?
so it was like one of those moments where it's like, okay, you can go about it one of two ways. Like way number one, you can get mad and yell and scream and like fight with this person. Or way number two, you can utilize your vendor network, which we'll get to in a few minutes, I'm sure, and try to make it work and try to fix a problem. And so I opted to option number two, which is what I kind of thought I would do. I called a friend who's based in New York, and I was like, hey, this is like literally on the plane. I'm like texting with this person. I was like, hey, like I have this problem. Can you help me? He was like, give me half an hour. And I'm like over the Atlantic Ocean still, right? And so I get an email back from him like half an hour later, connecting me with a different AV contact in Berlin, actually. And he was like, hey, this is Evan. Here's his issue. Can you help him? So long story short, they ended up having a warehouse in Munich as well. I gave them the gear list, gave them the show details. The truck rolled up on time for setup. The show executed flawlessly. The client booked a 5-year retainer with us from that show. And the craziest part of the whole thing is I got the final bill at the end of the day, and all I was charged for was labor. And so I was like, is this a problem? Like, was this an error? And basically he said, no, like it was a slow month for us. So I just need my labor covered. The gear was sitting in the warehouse anyways, not being used. So I'm happy to give you the gear for free to save you, so that next time you're in this side of the world, you can contact me and we can continue the relationship. And so I tell that story for a few reasons. Like, number one, obviously it goes to like how we deal with stress and how we deal with problems at work on a day-to-day basis, because everything is possible. Number two, it shows you how important having a great and extensive vendor network really is, more so when you need them versus when you don't need them.
Mhm.
And then the third key piece here is that like always plan for the worst, and when you end up with the best, it's a bonus.
I mean, there's so much to unpack there, right? This could have gone wrong so badly from
Yeah,
so many points of view. Also speaks to like this feast or famine side of our industry. Like, here's this company that's double booked, right? And here's another company that they're like, we're just going to charge you for labor because it's been hard for us this season. We haven't
literally.
had a solid pipeline.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I've had this happening to me only once where I got a call at 6 a.m. in the morning that, oh, by the way, we got overbooked and good luck.
Yeah.
And I was loading in literally at 8 a.m. that morning into a ballroom for a fundraising gala. And all I'm thinking is, I am fucking this event up for my client, and I cannot do that.
Right.
I cannot be the reason why this event is ruined. So that's when you start calling everyone you know and pulling favors. Like, by the way, what do you have in your warehouse? This is what I need, right? Luckily,
Yeah.
the house was very, very gracious to work with us after we outbid against them, and we were gonna bring in a third-party vendor
Yeah.
and helped us out. But it could have been a different situation. It could have been them being saying, well, good luck to you because the first time around you decided to go with someone else, right? And as an event producer, as an agency, as an event manager, I mean, when you have that kind of weight like sitting on you, I remember like the type of stress I experienced during those 2 hours when I was like working through all the logistics of how can I get someone else in such 12-hour last minute timeline. Um, I think I aged about 3 years.
Now imagine doing that flying in the air.
I can't
Luckily, and
even.
like,
You were
can
like,
you
I had
imagine?
I had brown hair, but when I landed, it was all gray.
Like, can you imagine if I wouldn't have got the Wi-Fi package for that flight and I didn't have other work to do? Like,
Oh my
I would
gosh.
have landed in Munich like 8 hours later, and I would have been delayed 8 hours worth of solving the problem. And we would have like literally we did an overnight flight. I remember we landed at like 2 o'clock in the morning local time. And our load in was starting like not that day, but like the following day. And so I literally had like one day basically to like brief the new team, give them all like the details, give them all like the renders and the drawings and everything else that we had done already. Thankfully, I owned all that work, and like not the AV company owned it.
Mhm.
But like, imagine like I'm like on the plane, like literally,
Yeah.
I'm like I love flying. I'm like I am such a big fan of airplanes and flying. Like my son, like we go to the airport and we watch planes landing. Like it's like amazing. And on that flight, I was so stressed. My stress level was so high. Like, thankfully, I was sitting in premium economy, because like, had I not been with like the extra leg room, I would have like jumped out the window.
Would I be the person that kicks the seat in front of you like
Literally, I
consistently the
was
whole
so
flight?
mad. I was so mad when that first email came in. I was like, literally, like, they loaded, like, the cameras were rolling like 72 hours from the email being sent, and I was like, you didn't know this like a week ago or like 2 days ago. You had to wait till I was
Right.
flying to Germany. Like, it was
Exactly.
crazy. It was crazy.
Like you knew that you're double booked well in advance. Like this wasn't, unless the contract negotiation happened until the very
Who
last
knows?
minute, and that's
Who
when they
knows?
decided, well, we're gonna go with the higher bidder, and the higher bidder seems to be this other event. Because I mean, this is not a small event. Just
Right.
thinking about the labor that you need to find and
It
pull
was
to make sure
crazy.
that you outfit this humongous
Yeah.
event in all those roles. It's not just one breakout tech in here
No.
and one breakout tech in there, right? Like we're talking about a full-fledged AV support team for the
Yeah.
GS and probably all the other rooms that they had. I can't even imagine. I feel
It was
like,
crazy.
Evan, this would have been a great story for our previous season event about it. And I know we wanted to get you on that, and we
I
are
know.
really, really working our schedule, but you are dealing with this.
I
So
know.
here
I
we
know.
are.
It's all good. It's all good. But
Fabulous.
it goes towards vendors and working with good vendors and knowing how to find good people to help you when you need them.
Absolutely. So let's get into that a little bit, because you've mentioned how important it is to leverage your partner network. And I'm very intentional when I talk about vendors versus partners,
Yeah.
because I feel like there's a bit of a difference in the way you relate with that. Like this company in Munich, it was a vendor to you at first, but it turned into a partner instantly the moment they showed up, the moment they really were there to save your arse, basically. So this, not only that is key in event production, but is really the lifeline to have that partner relationship with a wide network of vendors. So for event professionals and small business agency owners in the event space that are listening, what are some of the strategies that they can use to build strong and mutually beneficial relationships with their partners?
Yeah, so I would say, so number one, I would say the company that screwed us over was definitely a vendor, where the one who came through and saved us was definitely a partner and became a partner. So like, that's a very clear distinction. Like, I think number one is like, the distinction comes down to like, partners are companies that you know and trust and will have your back when you need them to, and will deliver for you every single time without fail. So I think that's a big distinction that we need to make between a vendor is like someone maybe you use one time and it wasn't great, so you don't use them again, where a partner is really what we look for in the industry. And we look to build partnerships with companies around the world that we can call on when we need to. In terms of what you look for, honestly, like, sometimes it's what you don't look for that is really the magic sauce here. And it's like exactly like what happened to me. It's like, I didn't even know that was going to happen. They came in, and forget about the show and forget about the load in, forget about the operating, whatever. When it came down to like billing and payments and everything else, they realized that we were in a bind. They were able to help us out. It goes both ways, right? And we used them for 2 more years or 3 more years, whatever it was, in that region for this event, because of how the partnership was grown, right? So it's about a two-way street between you and that other company, and what you can do for me and what I can do for you, and how we can work mutually beneficial with each other. So that's number one. Number two, I think it's about doing your due diligence and your research before you even go and work with somebody. So, for example, a lot of us are part of Slack communities or industry communities that people recommend vendors and partners all the time. So I think it's like using those connections, using those recommendations, because someone's going to recommend someone who they have a good relationship with, because they're not going to recommend bad people, right? Like, when someone asks me for recommendations, because a lot of these communities I'm one of, let's say, few Canadians, generally speaking, less so people from Toronto. So when people have events and they do big shows in Toronto, a lot of people come to me and they're like, hey, I'm from Nashville, or I'm from Dallas, or I'm
Yeah,
from Florida. I'm doing an event in Toronto. Who do you recommend? And so it's like, I would give my best companies, my best partners forward, because I know that it's my relationship with them on the line, and it's my industry reputation on the line when I'm giving those recommendations. So it's about using your network to your advantage and finding out those partners that other people have vetted already, so that you're not actually doing the vetting process yourself.
totally. You know what's interesting though, when you actually want to transition a vendor to a partner relationship and that vendor doesn't want to go there. And
Awkward.
it's happened to me once. It's like in your example, you wanted this AV company to be your partner for this event in Munich, but
Yeah.
then they decided to keep themselves in that vendor capacity
Yeah.
and pull out instead of staying committed to the contract, staying committed to the agreement, verbal or not, that was
Yeah.
made in advance. And that's when to me, it's like mind blowing, because as an event manager, event producer, event planner, you're really trying to create the relationship. You're really trying to bring them in and say, hey, I really want to be committed to you. And I would like for us to do this like long term, like in a marriage or in a long term relationship. And they're like, yeah, until they're like, oh, but there's somebody like hotter down the street, so I'm just gonna
Right.
go that direction now. Right? That to me is mind blowing, because why, like, it speaks to integrity, and it speaks
100%.
to so many like human qualities that you would want in that partner, the same way you would want into, say, a spouse or someone that you want to spend the rest of your life with, whatever. So that being said, I'm curious, as you go through this process of taking a vendor into a partnership, are there any effective maybe negotiation tips that you have, or how do you maintain that relationship over a long term or turn it into a long term relationship?
I think it's about, like, let's say, let's just continue using the AV company as the example here. So let's say you're doing a multi-year show. It's the same show year over year, same client. It's their, whatever it is, their gala, their holiday party, whatever you're doing for them. I think for me, it's about what you do year one, you can't replicate year two. You
Mm,
have to level up. You have to do better. You have to do more. You have to do different every year, year over year. So it's about finding where you can push the envelope and where you can take risks and take chances in whatever capacity of the industry we're talking about here. And I think it's about, as part of your negotiation, I hate being that person who like dangles carrots over people and says, hey, like, if you book year one, we'll do a year two, three, four, five. Cause like you can't always guarantee that. And so it's about crushing it year one, doing a really great job, finding that groove with each other, finding what communication style works, what that cadence looks like. Do you have to have weekly meetings? Can you have like once a month meetings until the show gets closer? And then finding how you work well with that partner, with that vendor, and then building on it year over year, hopefully mutually beneficial for the end client, and at the end of the day, the guests that are coming to that event, so that everybody looks good in front of the client.
totally. Now, to switch tracks a little bit into event sponsorships, because this is another one of those touchy points, especially if your AV depends on how many sponsors
Yep.
have been acquired to pay for it. And that applies to also if you're a speaker. Actually, I had an instance recently where I got an invitation to speak at an event. And of course, the next very paragraph is, but we're a nonprofit and we don't really have any funds to pay for this, blah, blah, blah. And of course, my response is in so many words, well, guess what? I have worked with a lot of events to bring on sponsors, and I have quite a few ideas ideas on how we can implement a sponsorship strategy to
Right.
pay for it, right? So, needless to say, sponsorship is essential to an event success. In your experience, what are some of the most effective ways event professionals can maximize ROI for their sponsorship programs, ensuring value for both the event and the sponsors, in the context of like sponsorship will pay the bill for quite a few things out there, including production, including quality speakers, including better content, including, I don't know, streaming of your event or recording of your event, so you actually have some quality video for evergreen that you can repurpose in whatever ways you want for marketing purposes.
So I think, and I talk about this a lot with the other different people in the industry. I think the biggest downfall of the sponsor world is, and the trade show world is, trade show organizers, so people who run the events, only look at the attendee experience and they don't look at the sponsor experience. And it's a huge downfall in our industry. And
So basically, to
we need,
bring them on, you actually have to pay attention to what type of experience you're
right,
giving them in the first place, not the other way around.
exactly. And a lot of times what happens is people say, well, an attendee is paying $2,000 to come. Let's just use IMEX, for example. An attendee, non-hosted buyer, they're paying $1,000, $2,000, whatever it is, to come to a big show. So they're giving us the biggest revenue stream. So we're just focusing on the attendee experience, what their journey looks like from purchasing the ticket to when they get back home after the show. That's what we care about, because that's our revenue stream that makes the most amount of money. The problem is there's this massive piece of the bulk of the industry that's sponsors, and your sponsors are what offsets your cost, generally speaking, more so than your attendee cost per ticket. And so if, as an industry, if we would recognize that, not only would you be able to get higher quality sponsors because your sponsorship prospectus will be a higher quality document because you'll actually care more about your sponsors, but also your sponsors will want to come back and they'll want to spend more money getting into a higher tier package or a different kind of packaging, because they know that you care about them, that you treat them well, that they have that amazing experience. And so when it comes to sponsorship ROI, as a company who's sponsoring an event, you want to make sure that you're getting the most out of that event, or what's the point in even being there? And so the biggest piece that I can kind of like either share on is, thankfully in previous roles, I've done both roles of being a sponsor at an event and also owning an event that brings in sponsors simultaneously. So I've seen both sides of the coin here. And what we tried to use when we were doing our own events that we brought sponsors in is we actually had an entire team of people that just did sponsorship management. And so that was a team of like 2 or 3 people. They built the prospectus, they met with sponsors, they sold them on the packages, they onboarded them to the program, they got all their like logos and creative and everything for the booths and everything else. And then on site, they were there to welcome sponsors to the event in their own check-in area, their own registration area. They walked them up to where their booth was. They showed them where like the sponsor lounge was, what they could do, what they had access to. And it was almost like they were like brand ambassadors, but just for sponsors. And what happened was we saw tons of amazing feedback, not only feedback, but we saw huge ROI year over year. And we actually were able to almost triple our sponsorship revenue from year 1 implementation to year 2 before I happened to leave the company. But over that 2-year plan and that 2-year like set of time, we went from like 90 something thousand dollars in sponsorship revenue up to like almost $300,000 in sponsorship revenue for the same event, because those sponsors knew that they were going to be treated properly and they had that team in place that was there just for them.
So that makes a great point to how you basically treat your sponsors as VIPs. It's not just your
Yeah.
audience members, it's not just your VIP speakers, but your
Yeah.
sponsors. Because I mean, depending on the event, some of those sponsors they pay well in the thousands upon thousands of dollars to be there, right?
Yeah.
Which brings a completely different type of conversation of like where really is the ROI for the attendee if
Right.
say every session is a sponsor session and it's kind of sounds like a pitch deck, or
Yeah.
every other activation seems like a sponsor activation and
Yeah.
you feel like you're consistently not there to be educated but there to be sold to, right? So there
Right.
has to be a balance on both ends here. But I'm curious, in your experience, having done the both side, as you mentioned earlier, have you seen a sponsorship activation or sponsorship done well? And how was that different from some of the other ones where, say, it wasn't done so well and there wasn't so much ROI, and there was a lot of other things that could have done to be a different outcome?
So I think when you look at activations, you have to look at two pieces of the puzzle. I think the first piece is what's what value is that activation for the attendee's perspective? Why does the attendee want to do the activation? Why should they go to your activation? What are they getting out of it? And then on the other side, from the brand side, I think it's what as a brand am I doing to deliver on my KPIs, my metrics, my goals, and how am I pushing my boundaries forward? And I think a lot of brands do this really well. Some brands don't do it as well. I think that we talk about like immersive activations where people are immersed in stuff that can go really well. I think like Encore did, I think at IMAX last year, they did that whole room that you went into, and it was
They
like
had
those
it this year
stories
too. Yeah.
this year too, right? So that
Yeah.
like I mean, I wasn't at IMAX this year, unfortunately. There we can have a whole conversation about why that happened separately. But I heard that it was really well received and was really well done year over year.
I
And
just felt like
so
this year was very much a copy of the first year. So if the first year was a bit of a wow factor, right? The
wow,
second
yeah,
year was like, so
not so
this is
wow.
kind of the same. What else
Right,
is new?
right. So let's talk about it last year then. Let's talk when it was wow and it was exciting. And I think when I saw photos and I saw video
Yeah.
content of it afterwards, I think what separates a great activation from like a whatever one is, and this is true about events in general, and this is kind of my mantra on events, you need to make people feel different from before they walked into the space till the moment they walk out of the space. And you could do that on many different areas. You could do it through the five senses, you can do it through education, through entertainment, through showing someone something that was never done before, like a demo scenario. But if you can change people's feeling from before they walk in to when they leave, you've done something successful. And I think that's what Encore's goal was last year, was to make you feel different when you left to when you came in. And a lot of people do that. Like a lot of companies do it. And I think that's your sort of gauge on success versus maybe something that falls a little flat.
Totally. I mean, there's a lot to be said and a completely different conversational topic about the Encore having the funds, having the monopoly
Of
over a
course.
in-house AV and all the things, and how even after doing that, there's still a lot of grunted event planners that do not agree with their pricing model, do not
Of
agree with
course.
how different their pricing is from venue to venue. They still have issues with quality. They still have issues with why is this event suffering from so many different quality perspectives, from logistics to implementation, when we are spending so much money and we are expecting a certain service in return. So we'll leave that for another time. For now, what I want to focus ourselves moving into Our next topic is, as you already mentioned, trade shows, conferences, and how that can be quite challenging of a space to stand out, as you mentioned with the example previously. So if you are to do it well and say you don't necessarily have a lot of budget, right? Like your budget is not that of a half $500,000 to pull this off. What are some other tools or strategies that event producers can use to make their either trade show or their conference memorable and impactful?
So I think it's a few things. It's content. So if you're running your own conference or event, are you running content as well as an exhibit hall and a trade show floor? If you are, then I think content has to be spot on. Like we can get into a whole conversation about speakers and content and what it looks like and what's good content and bad content. But at the end of the day, you want people to leave again, like I said, learning something, being educated more than they did before they came to the event, because that's why they come to your event, right? Is to get out of it something from the keynote or from a breakout speaker that they're really excited to see. And then you have your trade show element, your exhibit hall floor. And like I think a lot of times conferences fall into the same trap of an exhibit hall floor where it's like booths around a big circle, people walk in the middle, maybe you have a coffee station in the middle somewhere, maybe you have a food station somewhere on the floor, but a lot of times it's the same kind of setup, right? And so I think what we need to do as an industry is set ourselves different and do things differently than everyone else. So maybe it's like, and I think I saw this from Adweek in Miami this year that happened in September, I think it was in Miami. They had outdoor, indoor trade shows. So it was like you had your trade shows inside the ballroom in the conference center, but then when you walked outside on like the boardwalk of the property, there was also vendor booths along the boardwalk outside. And nobody knew because it was like you had to go through the exhibit hall to get to the boardwalk.
Mm.
So you didn't know that there was more vendors going to be outside till you got through the whole show floor, right? And so they kept some vendors in each category for outside as well, so you got the inside outside feeling. And like that's something that I've never seen before, right? All the other trade shows is one area normally, it's all in one
Do you
square.
feel that that was a successful approach, or was it a missed opportunity for some of the outside vendors if they didn't get as much foot traffic because people didn't know that there's more?
No, I think it's a huge win. And I think it's a win because when you have outside versus inside, yes, you have to deal with like weather and elements, and you can solve that with tents and with other things. But I think when you're doing something different and you're trying something new, you will always be memorable if it hit or doesn't hit. And we always want it to hit and we always want things to be successful. But even if they're not 100% successful, doing different will always be memorable for guests. And people don't want the same stuff, forgive my language, the same crap every year over year at events, right? It's like,
Yeah.
even like you could have the worst vendor, but if they're in a new environment or a new way of delivering something, I will remember that because it's not cookie cutter as every other show is. And to me, like I look at the lens, I come from like a lens of like doing things different, pushing the boundaries, pushing the envelopes. Like for just a very quick example, we did an event in-house at my last company last year, and we were the first corporate event in Canada to have an indoor roller skating rink in our celebration experience inside of a convention center.
That's
And
awesome. I
so,
think I saw the
and
pictures of that was it in Biz Bash magazine? Where
I
was it
think so.
posted?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I did an article with Biz Bash for it.
that's
And so
awesome.
it's like regardless, like it hit, everyone loved it. It was so successful. But even if it wasn't successful, people are still talking about it today. And I'm still getting messages today from people who weren't even at the event who were like, oh my God, I saw that you posted this. How did you do it? Where did you come up with the idea for it? Because it was different. And
The
it wasn't your
Olympics.
typical.
Just kidding.
Exactly. The other like Paris was the same thing. It was like different, right?
Yeah.
And we can talk about it for hours about Paris and how it was not successful or was
We
successful.
already covered that in one of our event about
Right.
it. So let's
But it
leave that
was but it
off the
was different.
table.
But it was different, right? And it was different, and so we still talk about it
Yes.
because it wasn't cookie cutter. And so bringing it back to trade shows, if you can do things like if you can have your keynote on the trade show floor on a stage in that center area where the coffee station is, and your keynote is talking where your exhibit booths are, typically vendor booths are not able to access content in the shows. And so if you bring that stage to your exhibit hall floor, now you're doing different. Now you're doing things that people will remember. And so that, to me, that's the secret sauce of standing out, of being a trend-setting event professional, of being a brand who is not doing the same as everyone else. And as a brand, as you host your trade show, you're as an event host, and you have competition doing trade shows in and around the same time that you do it, you will get people coming to your shows over others because they know to expect different from your shows.
Before we continue, I want to give a shout out to the team at TreeFan Events. We are not just an event planning and production agency. We are focused on integrating innovative AV solutions, AI strategies, and wellness-focused practices through our Fit for Events framework. Whether you're planning live, virtual, or hybrid events, the team at TreeFan Events is here to provide personalized planning, strategic design, and seamless technology management to ensure everything runs flawlessly. And now, we are offering AI-powered workshops to help you grow your business, build stronger teams, and elevate your events to the next level. If you want to learn more about how the team at TreeFan Events can help make your event unforgettable, visit treefanevents.com.
To what we said earlier, the other side of the secret sauce, I think in the example of indoor-outdoor trade show, which I absolutely love the concept,
Yeah.
is good marketing and good signage. If
Yeah.
you can nail that, then
Yeah.
finding those vendors outside won't be a problem because there's something more. There's something
Right.
else aside from what's here inside. As long
Yeah.
as, again, the signage leads you to that. If that's a lost opportunity, then your outside vendors probably will feel like they were not visited as much as the inside vendors because they were kind of out of sight, out of mind, right? What I wanted to also highlight, and I'm like trying to remember now, it's like, oh, I was thinking of something else. What was it? It'll come back to me. What I would like to go into as we're thinking about also technology and event production, because in the example that you gave with the ice rink inside of a space, that sounds like a fun idea until you get into the logistics of how do you pull that off. So
Yeah.
I want to kind of drive the conversation into the logistical challenges that might have implied as you're pulling this off, or also some of the wins or some of the forethought that went into it to make sure that this is done well and it's executed well, not just in the concept, but also in the actual implementation.
Yeah. So funny enough, for that example specifically, the room that was in was also our general session main stage room that we flipped during the day. And so people were in the main session till like 11 a.m. Then they left and they were in breakouts in the exhibit hall and other areas of the venue. So we had from like 11 a.m. until 5 p.m. to flip the room over from general session setup to party setup. And so when
And
you already
freeze the
have
floor in the
no, so
process.
it wasn't an ice rink. It was a roller rink. It was a roller skating rink.
Oh, okay,
It
okay, okay,
wasn't
okay, okay.
ice. Yeah.
I was thinking ice.
So
I'm like, man, might have
that would be
taken
crazy. That's how we'll do. That's how we'll level it up next time. That's
next
the
time,
next step.
exactly.
That's the next step.
With maybe more of
So
a time in between the
right.
flips.
You need a couple of days. Yeah, need a couple of days. But so in terms of like the logistics and the planning and how we implement it all, right? It's like we had to plan out, and I hate being that planner who's like, we have a minute by minute run a show, and if we don't go minute to minute, like that's not how my brain works. That's not how I roll. I roll as like event to event to event. So like first this happens, then this happens. If it's 10 seconds late or early, that's irrelevant in my world, right? Because the audience doesn't know and they don't care about that. And so And so when we're looking at it, we're like, okay, we know the general session ends at 11. We know that the venue needs an hour to clear out all the chairs. Then we can have our furniture company start to roll in, all our vendors rolling in for the flip, for the party. So it's all about, and I like to work backwards for stuff. So I'm like, okay, the doors to the party open at 6 p.m. What needs to happen at 5:45? What happens at 5:30? And we work backwards from there, because at the end of the day, the doors are opening at 6 o'clock. And like, yes, there's flexibility on that always and whatever. But in my mind, the doors open at 6. We're ready for 5:50, right? And so when you're planning for it, not only it's like we had to plan the concept and work with many different teams like signage and printing and AV and all the other teams of venue and insurance and everyone else to like make sure it was all going to go smoothly. But it's like when you're actually doing the setup and the flip from the show, it's like you're balancing all these different things. And I have like this sort of analogy that I use, and it's a football analogy, right? As like the event producer, you're the quarterback and you're calling the plays, and you're bringing in the right teams for the right plays when you need them, right? And so we had like our mornings team kind of come and leave, then our afternoon team was coming in, then the night team was coming. And so you're like calling all those shots, right? And you're like balancing all the different elements that need to come into play to make sure that everything happens seamlessly and that you have a successful event. And it's like, what do I need to do as an event producer 8 months before the event to make sure that I'm set up the day of? It's like all the meetings and all the planning and all the process and the renders and the measurements and going for site visits. And we ended up using like vinyl flooring for the rink. And then we had disco balls that hung from the ceiling. And we had a separate lighting track that we added during the flip to light up the roller rink. And it was like all part of a whole other big show, right? And so all of these things that are like little pieces that seem little in themselves all roll up into this bigger event production matrix. Like, to me, that's where you're cooking, right? That's where you're like, this is how we know we're doing something right. It's like you go from the scrap piece of paper drawing in someone's idea to like seeing the show being built in front of you in the room. Like, to me, that's where the magic happens. Like, that's my favorite part of the industry, is watching the build happen and being in the room and seeing it go from an empty space to this gorgeous room that is everything you wanted it to be and more. And then the doors open and people come in and they're like, holy shit, like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. With the roller rink, it was like we were pulling on people's nostalgia from when they were younger and they would roller skate on the weekends, and people were like, this is literally the coolest thing I've ever seen. We had a couple of people who actually never left the roller rink the entire party. They never wanted to give up their roller skates.
I'm thinking of my friend Cindy. That would totally be that one of those
right?
people.
They like went to the food buffet with the roller
And they were
skates
still
on.
eating.
And they were eating on the roller skates, right? So it's like, it was successful and it was a great show and it was a great event, but by no means was it easy to pull off. We had to go through tons of hoops from insurance and corporate legal, because when you're mixing alcohol with roller skating, like, you could have potential issues, right? And so getting past those hurdles and then working with the AV team and like figuring out what we had to add and how many fixtures we could add and lighting, and would it work in the space, and is the venue going to allow us to do this? Like, all these questions, we ended up getting past them, but every step of the way it was like another hurdle came, and we were like, okay, like, we kind of have a decision to make. Like, do we try to get past the hurdle and figure out how to win and how to take this to the next level? Or is this where we call it? Like, is this the hurdle that's going to throw it out the window? And every time I kept pushing, and I was like, no, like, we have to do this. We're going to get so much out of it. The return on this will be 10 times worth any stress to build it and to get to that show. And at the end of the day, I was right. And I still get messages about it, like, from the people that were there and people that weren't there. That's like, how did you do this? How did you pull it off? it was the coolest thing I've ever seen.
There's something magic about, as you said, planning a huge show or something completely different than what it was done before, and seeing it all come to be under your very own eyes. I remember I was working on an event in Atlanta at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and we had several vendors and partners, and everything had to be lined up. It's like one of those domino effects that if one piece doesn't fall straight, the whole stack is gonna get out of sync, right? So
Yeah.
we have taken over that entire stadium, and we had racks and stacks of line arrays, thousands of moving heads, and this like 300 feet LED wall that had to all be in sync with each piece of the production that was going in. Hundreds upon hundreds of stage hands to help support the setting up. And I remember like one of those pieces got just a little bit out of sync, and that was the power. We
Right.
didn't get the electrician, his team, on time to provide all the power necessary to power this entire event and all the AV production elements. And we had to wait. And that put us back in a lot of other stages of our setup, right? So
Yeah.
that created this whole domino effect of additional labor, additional expense, additional stress, which only goes to say events and event management, they can be a very high stress environment, not only because of the long hours and the constant demands, but as you said, like this one straw could be the one thing that breaks this camel's back.
Yeah.
So many different elements that go into pulling on a perfect show. So my question to you is, as we're coming to a close to our conversation, which has been a very fruitful conversation, when you think of all the high demands of your role, of the years that you spent in your role as a AV production manager and all the other hats that you've worn, I'm pretty sure is more than just that. How do you balance the intense requirements of that with maintaining your mental and physical well-being? Because we have to think about that.
For sure. It's gonna sound really strange, and like everyone, like I think everyone can agree that like kids are like, especially young kids, are like add other layers of stress that we don't always want.
Right.
I have two sons, one's 4 and one's 18 months, and
You're in
so
the baby stages. Oh
we're
my
like we're in
goodness.
it, we're in it. And so honestly, like coming home from a show and like you could FaceTime with them at the show when you're away, and that's great and whatever. But coming home and like just getting that hug from the kids and like from your partner is like that like de-stresses everything out. And like I kind of mentioned in the beginning when we were talking about the planes and everything, like my older son is like addicted to airplanes. He loves them. He loves cars and airplanes.
I
And
can see why you're
that's
now into airplanes, because you're in that stage.
literally so
We're
like
past
my
that. Like right now
right.
we're into Minecraft.
So I take my older son to the airport and we watch planes land on the weekend, right? And it's like
That's awesome.
when my younger son's in a nap, like it's a great way to get out of the house and it's quiet for him so he can sleep. And we just go and we sit like for an hour and we'll just watch the planes land. And to me, like being there with him, just like having the planes land above our heads, that's like so like it's so calming. It's like so much fun. It's just like all the stress of like the travel and the show and the clients and like everything that was on site, like coming home and like doing that and having that moment together is like makes it all worth it. Like you hate to leave your family, obviously. You try to leave as least amount of time as you can, as much as possible. But like when you have to do it, coming home and having that like routine that we have, just like that to me is like that's the answer for me. It's like getting that hug from the kids and doing those like those things with your kids or your family. It makes it all worth it, and it's such a de-stressor, even though sometimes kids can stress you out in different ways. But just doing that and having that like kind of that kind of moment with the kids is like it's what it's all worth it.
It brings a sense of normalcy to your
100%.
crazy life that
100%.
involves so many elements that can bring so much stress into your daily routine. And
Yeah.
I'm happy for you to hear that. I have my own set of a routine at home that I like to keep with my kids. And when I'm gone, we would go on WhatsApp and video
Yeah.
chat and still try to keep a bit of that routine in place. One of my favorite way to implement that is I would have them at the end of the day to tell me their secret, like one of their secret, what happened over the day. We call that a secret in the sense that, well, it's not a secret to you, but it's a secret to me. So if you tell me your secret, it's kind of you revealing what happened over the day, over the course of a day when I wasn't
Yeah.
there. And it
Yeah.
works miracles, especially with my son, because he's like 12 and he's all cool and it's like he doesn't have anything to talk about. Like, what happened at
Right.
school? Nothing. What happened on the bus? Nothing. What happened here and there? Nothing, right? But by
Honestly,
bringing
my
him,
4-year-old's the same way. My 4-year-old also, nothing happens at school. Like,
because
he's
their
in
memory
JK.
is like
Yeah.
this short, like they only
Yeah.
remember what happened 3 minutes ago.
Exactly. Exactly. It's the same at 4 and at 12. It's the same memory span. Yeah.
But if we ask them to share their secret, it makes
Yeah.
them think, okay, what happened today that's a secret to mom and dad? And
Right.
then they open up and they start
Yeah.
talking. So it's been kind of like
Yeah.
a bit of our tradition, which is really sweet to see. They all come up with their own version of what the secret is. But anyway, this conversation has been such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. I finally came back to me when we were talking about stages in the round and inviting the audience into the speaking engagement and bringing them into conversation, I was going to mention how well, and this is a shout out to Connect Meetings. I've produced some of their shows, and they always have the keynote stage in the middle of the trade show.
Yeah.
And that is such a well designed concept because, like you mentioned, if you're a trade show exhibitor, you rarely have time to walk away from your booth to go and engage in education unless you're one of the sponsored slots, right? To have something to say on stage, which comes at a price, all of that. But having the educational stage in the middle of the trade show, you get some of that just by vicinity, right? I
Yeah.
would say though, IMAX, as much as I love their educational opportunities, and they have so much in the wellness and neuroscience and resilience side of the events, which is so important to be able to have those breaks and spaces. The education is always at the end of the trade show. Like I feel like this last time, because I had three different speaking engagements and I was doing appointments exactly at the opposite side of the trade show, and then the engagement stage and the educational stage is at the other end. Like just walking back and forth the trade show in like 10 minutes or less, because you needed really 20 minutes to do that walk, but I only had 10 minutes, so I
Yeah.
was racing. Like at this point I'm like doing laps, right? That needs to change. Like we need to
Yeah.
have the stage in the middle of the trade show, so it's not such a long run. Like you're going from one end to the end to the other, and you're doing 20,000 steps just because you have to cross so much, cover so much space. So
Yeah.
that's one thought that I had. I'm like, I hope that someone at IMAX, Tahira, hears. Actually, is going to be a guest here soon anyway. We're going to have to bring that up and see what can be
Yeah.
done about it, just in
Yeah.
the layout. Like it's a small detail, but it's such a big detail, right? As you mentioned, every little detail counts. Now, as we come to the end of our conversation here, and for our listeners, Evan, that would like to learn more about you, you do share quite a bit on LinkedIn, how they can connect with you. What is the newsletter that you want to highlight, or any of the content pieces that you are so fond of?
Yeah, so I think like I'm like on all major social platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, I'm all over the place. I do a weekly post on LinkedIn. It's called the Event Edge, where I talk about different topics in the industry. So it's like a weekly. I try to do it the same day every week. Sometimes it changes depending on schedules and how busy things are, but it's like kind of my way of like giving to the industry, talking about things that people don't want to talk about, haven't talked about, are interested in talking about. So definitely engage with that series on LinkedIn. I always tell people I love talking to event people about event stuff and people who are like-minded like I am, like we are. So I'm happy to chat with just about anybody about event stuff. So I'm around, I'm accessible, and if not, like that's kind of the best place to find me.
Totally. Well, thank you so much again for joining us and providing your valuable insights and sharing some of your stories. Also, thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into today's episode. If you enjoyed today's episode and today's conversation, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback really helps us keep this content alive and spreading it around. And with that, until next time, keep innovating, stay connected, and keep demystifying the world of events. Thank you, Evan. See you on LinkedIn or on Ichi.
Exactly. See you there.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Events Demystified podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with other professionals like yourself. If you're interested in learning more about TreeFan events, including our future AI education talks and workshops, or to see how we can support your next event, book a free 20-minute consultation through the link in the episode notes. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on YouTube, Spotify, and social media for updates on future episodes, industry insights, AI news and tips, and more. And if you have any topics you'd like us to cover, feel free to reach out.